Hello, I'm Agent Random. Of all the crossovers in gaming, there aren't as many as iconic as the Kingdom Hearts series. Well, I guess maybe Super Smash Bros., which actually includes Kingdom Hearts now, so there's really no avoiding the spiky-haired boy any way you slice it. Kingdom Hearts as a series is the crossover between Disney's lineup of properties and Square Enix's Final Fantasy series. But you probably already knew that. What you also probably already knew if you're subscribed to this channel like the good children that I'm sure you all are, is that in 2012's Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, Square chose not to feature any Final Fantasy characters and instead brought in the cast from this little-known Nintendo DS game, The World Ends With You. This was a wonderful surprise for all 7 fans of the game. But 10 years later, I feel like this appearance from the edgiest kids on the block is a little underrated and in some cases, overhated. So let's take a look back at how The World Ends With You was represented in Kingdom Hearts and why I feel like it was the ultimate crossover. Spoiler information! For the World Ends With You side of things, I'll pretty much just be spoiling the original World Ends With You game. Outside of a brief mention of a returning character from the end of the game, I'm not really going to go into its sequel Neo much at all. That said, if you haven't played the first game and want to do yourself the biggest disservice by continuing not to play it, or if it's just been a while, I'll be recapping all the necessary information that you would need to know. As for Kingdom Hearts, I'll also recap any necessary info for the uninformed, but I'm also gonna go ham wild with spoilers for the whole series. I mean, come on, it's Kingdom Hearts. I could be making up spoilers and they would all sound just as real as the actual spoilers. Anyway, first let's cover some background info. Starting with The World Ends With You itself, which was developed for the Nintendo DS back in 2007. The game has always had close ties with Kingdom Hearts as it shared many staff members, one of which was Kingdom Hearts director Tetsuya Nomura, who was the creative producer and character designer for The World Ends With You. He loved The World Ends With You and really wanted it to take off. Unfortunately, the game flew under the radar hard. After about 5 years of this game not getting really much attention at all, Nomura used his heavy influence over the company to push for it to get a second shot. Aside from getting a mobile port of the game greenlit, he also wanted to make his ever-growing Kingdom Hearts community aware of this gem. So he shoved its main cast into a supporting role for Dream Drop Distance and let the game work its magic. And work its magic the game did. It wasn't anything that would light the world on fire, but it was a huge help in getting people to know about the game. I know that most fans of the World Ends With You series that I've met first learned about it from Kingdom Hearts, and I'm no different. That's not to say that every single person who played Dream Drop Distance was converted into a World Ends With You fan overnight. Still took me 3 years after hearing about the game to actually try it, but Dream Drop Distance still did its job of making people aware of the game. I'm pretty confident that the series would be nowhere near what it is today if Kingdom Hearts didn't give it a good jumping off point. To understand how The World Ends With You was repped in Dream Drop Distance, we need to first understand how other series were repped in Kingdom Hearts prior to that point. Kingdom Hearts is a crossover and had tons of cameos from Disney and Final Fantasy before its inclusion of The World Ends With You. And if you've ever played any of the games, it's quickly apparent that the way Disney is treated in comparison to Final Fantasy is extremely different. Likely due to Disney shareholders threatening to keep Nomura's cat hostage in the Disney vault without food or water, the Kingdom Hearts series is always extremely careful when handling any Disney character. In Kingdom Hearts, you travel to different locations called worlds, and most of these worlds are that of a Disney movie. Every world is meticulously designed to really make you feel like you're in that Disney movie. There will be gameplay mechanics introduced from that movie, so you can expect to fly around in the Peter Pan world. The characters act and sound just like you remember, so you can expect a number of original voice actors to reprise their roles. All in all, Disney was nearly perfectly emulated, as was seemingly mandated by the company itself. But funnily enough, Square Enix didn't have anywhere near the same desire for accuracy when it came to their own characters. In Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy characters basically aren't from Final Fantasy. Unlike the Disney properties, which all had their own worlds from their source material, Final Fantasy characters were canonically born in the Kingdom Hearts original worlds like Twilight Town or Destiny Islands. As such, they've lived very different lives. So when you see Cloud Strife, that is not at all the same Cloud Strife that you play as in Final Fantasy VII. And not even just from a canon standpoint. Well, I haven't played any of the Final Fantasy games, which is something I should maybe fix. Most of the Final Fantasy cast, from what I can tell, acts noticeably a little different than they do in their source material. Leon Kingdom Hearts is more like a walking reference to Squall Leonhardt's Final Fantasy VIII rather than actually being Squall Leonhardt's Final Fantasy VIII. So those are kinda like two extremes. Either the whole world of the source material itself is there, or you get some caricatures that sorta resemble people from another series. And if you were to hear that the World Ends With You cast, who have no mandate from Disney to be perfect representations of their original selves, were just going to be relegated to hanging out in one of the Kingdom Hearts original worlds, it would make sense to assume that they would get the Final Fantasy treatment rather than the Disney one. But in the end, they sorta got a mixture of both. In the Kingdom Hearts canon, there is a Shibuya world and these characters are from it, but we never see that world. And no, this isn't it, but watch my Kingdom Hearts 4 analysis for a full explanation on that. Instead, they're here in Traverse Town, but their representation isn't one-to-one like how it was in their home series. They're all toned down a little, which makes sense when going from a rated T game to a rated E game. So they're not quite vague references to their original selves like the Final Fantasy crew, but they're also not literally ripped from the source material like the Disney characters either. To get a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's take a look at what sort of narrative decisions they made with the World Ends With You in Dream Drop Distance. The world they appear in, Traverse Town, is the first world that Sora and Riku visit during their Mark of Mastery exams, which requires them to visit the alternate realm of the Sleeping Realm. All of the World Ends With You characters were effectively killed in their homeworld, but had the fragments of their souls dumped here in Traverse Town. And I love how this perfectly melds together two plot mechanics from both series. You see, in Kingdom Hearts, Traverse Town is the refuge world for all of the people who've had their own worlds destroyed. And in The World Ends With You, there's a point where Rhyme gets freaking eaten by a shark. But she's able to make a swift recovery due to the producer of the game, Sane Hanakoma, salvaging the fragments of her soul. Joshua does the same thing here, but instead to the whole main cast. For those that don't know, Neku, Shiki, Beat, and Rhyme, even before coming to Traverse Town, were all dead, and as a result were entered in a sort of win your way back to life contest called the Reaper's Game. At its core, the game is about cooperation and trust. Each player is required to work with a partner, and without that partner, they cannot fight. The original game on Nintendo DS puts this mechanic into the gameplay. The player would control both partners at the same time, one on the top screen and one on the bottom screen. These are explained in lore to be different zones. They cannot see the other, but they can feel the other's energy. And through trust, they can still win battles even if it looks like they're alone. So why am I explaining this? Well, this is why I feel the World Ends With You crowd was the perfect candidate for this game's guest cast. Just like the different zones of the Nintendo DS, Riku is within Sora's dream. Therefore, he's not actually physically with Sora, but instead travels through slightly different versions of the same worlds. They can't interact, but throughout the game, they learn to use each other's energy and trust to bend reality in their favor. The parallel even goes further with how at first no player is in the same version of the world as their partner. So like Neku is in Sora's version of the world while his partner Shiki is in Riku's version. When we first arrive in the world, well, first, we don't have a clue what's going on since Dream Drop Distance has a weird plot structure and doesn't actually explain what's going on for longer than you'd think, but we eventually see Sora get introduced to Neku.
Shut it. Huh? Talk about noise.
Get it? Noise? Cause like, you know, that's what the enemies in the game are called? Yeah, okay. Neku meeting Sora isn't unlike his first meeting with his partner Shiki. Neku's really freaking emo, and Shiki presents herself as really bubbly and outgoing. This creates a really fun contrast between the two because they are bound together by a partnership contract. Neku's not bound to Sora like he was with Shiki, but he is tasked with nabbing Sora, so he obliges in the most Neku of ways. That being effectively giving the nice friendly person the middle finger and dashing away. But let's talk more about Neku's mission. I'm speculating a little bit here, but every player seems to have a Reaper given mission like should be standard protocol. That little timer on their hands is the deadline. But being stuck in a totally different reality from their partners makes completing those missions difficult. So big bad Kingdom Hearts villain young Xehanort comes into town and uses this to his advantage. He and the rest of his crew want to get their black gloved hands on Sora for reasons I don't want to explain, and they do this through a really cool parallel to one of Neku's early character beats in The World Ends With You. There's a point where a particularly pink-haired Reaper approaches Neku and tells him that if he erases his partner, then he'll be let out of the game. Even though she's so obviously lying, Neku has so little care for Shiki that he'll jump at the chance to force choke her to death should it benefit him. Young Xehanort makes a similar offer to Neku. He and his partner can return to Shibuya should they bring him Sora. Just like in his home game, Neku takes the bait and does the job. Of course, this isn't a perfect translation of the events of The World Ends With You. Neku didn't know Sora beforehand and was under the impression that he wouldn't be hurt, both of which weren't the case in the time with Shiki. But the sentiment is still there and it's still clear what they were referencing. This scene still provides a taste of The World Ends With You story and I really like that. Young Xehanort also pulls the same thing on Shiki in Riku's world and yeah, I got nothing. It's not really a reference to anything, and honestly, it's sort of out of character for her, but whatever. Square does his character dirty more often than not, so what was I expecting? More interesting is the mission that he gives to Beat. In The World Ends With You, Beat becomes a Reaper for like a week and similarly has to follow orders to take out a target. Beat enters the scene after Riku has teamed up with Joshua, but he isn't there for Riku. He's there to slap around Josh. This is similar to how his motive for the entire third week of the game is to defeat Joshua. Actually, let's talk about Joshua. As you can imagine, since he's the one that brought everyone here, he's kinda powerful. Joshua's role in The World Ends With You is as Shibuya's composer. He's like the god that rules the Reaper's game. That's oversimplifying it a ton, but whatever. Joshua spends a portion of The World Ends With You partnered with Neku because plot, and they have a frankly hilarious dynamic where Joshua uses his, Joshua-ness to annoy Neku. Added on top of that is the fact that Joshua clearly knows way more than he lets on, knows that Neku knows that, and uses that to annoy Neku even more. And since Riku's on the edgier side of the Kingdom Hearts cast, this dynamic gets created with him and Joshua. Joshua seems to want to help all of the players find their partners by creating a portal between the two Traverse Towns. He wants to do this via Rhyme's dreams. And I really like how out of all of the characters, Rhyme is the one they decided to use as the source of the portal, because it's just so fitting with her character in The World Ends With You. Let me explain. The Reaper's game has something called an entry fee. Essentially, it requires that each player give up what they value most while playing the game. For Rhyme, those are her dreams. So of course, those dreams are a vital mechanic when she finds herself in the realm of dreams. That said, maybe it's best not to think too hard about how entry fees work in Kingdom Hearts. Because if Rhyme's dreams are the key to traveling between worlds, then she must still have them, yeah? Yet Shiki still totally seems to have her entry fee taken. She lost her appearance, which forced her to look like her best friend Eri, which is how she looks like in Kingdom Hearts. You could say that they just don't want to spoil her appearance reveal from the end of the game, but I disagree since they had no problem with Josh sprouting flipping angel wings at the end of the first visit. So is Shiki just like the only one to have a fee taken? Well, maybe not, since Rhyme does have a total memory loss, which isn't something that happens in The World Ends With You. Maybe that's her fee since they need her dreams to be kept intact? Which I guess just makes Beat's entry fee of Rhyme's memories of him a waste of a fee, since that would be encapsulated in hers, and Neku's entry fee is also supposed to be memory loss, and there's no telling if that's the case here or not. Like I said, best not to think about it. So instead, let's focus on a different Rhyme fun fact, that being her voice acting. Square went out of their way to make sure that every single original voice actor reprised their role, which is really cool, especially since The World Ends With You was a TS game and they really didn't have that many voice lines there. So this is really the first time that we really get to hear most of these characters say more than a couple vocal grunts. But things get interesting when it comes to Rhyme. Like I said before, she got eaten by a freaking shark, but that happens pretty early on into the game. So even though she's on the box and is marketed like a main character, she's got like maybe 20 minutes of screen time. As such, she only has one real line of voice acting.
Over here!
So in both the English and Japanese versions, they chose to reuse a voice actress for one of the other characters to be Rhyme's voice. In English, this was Kate Higgins, who played Uzuki, and in Japanese, this was Hitomi Nabatame, who voiced Konishi. But now that she's finally got more to say here in Kingdom Hearts, voice actresses for her were finally cast in English and Japanese. And they both proceeded to go on to become the official voice of Rhyme. Ayana Takaharu was treated the same as all the other original voice actors when they were all brought back for the Japanese version of the World Ends With You anime, and both her and Ashley Rose were brought back to voice Rhyme in Neo The World Ends With You. Anyways, the World Ends With You cast are all initially without their partners. So how are they surviving? With dead children, of course. I mean Dream Eaters. They're using Dream Eaters. That joke was probably really confusing to anyone that didn't see the Union Cross ending. Or actually, maybe not, since the World Ends With You cast are also dead kids? Wait, is there a connection there? We're introduced to these rip-off Pokemon early on through Neku. The Dream Eaters act as Sora and Riku's party members throughout the game. I also like how Neku's Dream Eater is a Neko cat. In The World Ends With You, Neku is like a mega fan of this artist named Cat, so it's very fitting. I also find it interesting that the only people in the game who we really see control Spirit Dream Eaters, that being the nice ones that don't want to kill you, are the World Ends With You characters. They're also the only ones capable of using flow motion, not that any of them ever do, except Neku in this one scene. Just a theory, but I wonder if that also means that they're visitors to the sleeping realm just like Sora and Riku are. As in, Shibuya exists in the normal reality with most of the other worlds. It's an interesting thought. Anyway, while dinking through Traverse Town in this game, Sora and Riku come across a few new districts that weren't there before. I think the in-lore reason for that is that Traverse Town is like sentient or whatever and expanded itself to accommodate the Reaper's game. Don't quote me on that one though. But what is really cool is the new Fountain Plaza area, which is just a big old homage to Shibuya. Not only is there a statue of the 104 building and the fountain itself, but also a mural by the aforementioned cat. Beyond that is the Flick Rush Stadium, which I guess is where all the Reapers are hanging out instead of actually doing their job, since there's a cup called the Tin Pin Cup, in which you fight 777, BJ, Tenho, and Minamimoto. Tin Pin being a dumb little minigame that you play in The World Ends With You. And all of those characters are Reapers. 777, BJ, and Tenho are all a part of a band together, and while Minamimoto isn't a part of that band, he is a fan favorite character, and you'd best be ready for his inevitable appearance in a future Kingdom Hearts game. Minamimoto did steal their microphone once though, and as far as I know, they never got it back. Back to the main story, outside of the Flick Rush area, Sora meets Rhyme, and she's soon taken by Joshua so he can do funky portal magic. Somewhere in the middle of that, Mr. Mew actually dies. Joshua gives a little exposition dump to Sora and Riku and proceeds to fly off into space with his giant angel wings, leaving anyone that didn't play The World Ends With You beyond confused and beyond spoiled. Following that, you get my favorite Keyblade in the Kingdom Hearts series, Skull Noise, a Keyblade tribute to The World Ends With You. The name, of course, being a twofold reference, partially to the noise enemies that you fight in the game, which is also referenced in the sound wave inside the blade, and partially to the skull symbol of the Reapers, which is also referenced on the teeth of the key. Not only that, different parts of the Keyblade reference each of the main characters. Neku's headphones make up the guard, Shiki's Mr. Mew doll is the token with the chain being the same color as her hair, the symbol on the hilt is the one on Beat's beanie, the bottom of the Keyblade is Rhyme's pendant, and for Joshua, the weapon generates angel feathers when it appears. You just can't beat this Keyblade. It's even really jagged and edgy, which you could say is a reference to The World Ends With You's art style, but in actuality, it's a physical manifestation of the pure edge baked into the game as a whole.
Out of my face. You're blocking my view. Shut up. Stop talking. Just go the hell away. All the world needs is me. I got my values, so you can keep yours. Alright? I don't get people. Never have. Never will.
While we're here, I also wanted to briefly touch on two Dream Eaters they made based off of World Ends With You characters who were created by the deaths of Neku and Beat's great-grandparents maybe. They're Pseudo, Neku, and Beatalike. Beatalike's one of my favorite Dream Eaters. I love how the wings make him a specific reference to Beat's time as a Reaper. Already that on its own would have been amazing. It gave a really nice taste of The World Ends With You and made sure to incorporate elements of the World Ends With You story into the story of this world that otherwise wouldn't have any World Ends With You elements. But they don't end it there because we actually get a second Traverse Town visit. I don't have nearly as much to say here. Everyone's back with their partners. Well, look, it's a light puck. Beat has a blah moment. Joshua's still a prick. Neku tells Sora that he'll see him in Shibuya and proceeds to laugh in KH4. But there is one moment that's really something sweet. It's this part where Neku and Shiki run off to do a mission, but Neku stops to have a little chat with Joshua. Neku questions if they'll make it home, and in response, Joshua mirrors one of his big lines from The World Ends With You.
But Neku, I thought you couldn't afford to lose. Give up on yourself and you give up on the world.
But Neku, I thought you couldn't afford to lose. Give up on yourself, and you give up on the world.
After hearing that, Neku asks Joshua if he'll be there too. Neku tells Joshua that he's his friend and that it's his home too. Neku wants to go home, but just as important to him is that he does it with Joshua. This is a reflection of the ending of The World Ends With You. Joshua is a composer. He's not typically supposed to mingle with the lower planes where Neku and the rest of the cast live. The very last scene of the game shows Neku making a speech to Joshua talking about how much the events of the game's story have changed him. He talks about how he has friends now and how they're all going to go and meet up, before extending that invitation to Joshua. Joshua, of course, cannot go, but he watches solemnly as the people that he's grown attached to go and enjoy their lives without him. Or, at least it's solemn in the DS version. For reasons beyond me, they changed that in the ports. But seeing Neku still express this same sentiment in Kingdom Hearts shows that he values his friends, as Joshua points out, like Sora, making Joshua feel touched. And this is even continued through the game's credits, where for a brief moment we see a little recreation of The World Ends With You's ending. At first we see Neku, Shiki, Beat, and Rhyme hanging out while Joshua is above and distant. But Kingdom Hearts gives us the happier version of events that we'd never really see in a World Ends With You game. Because later on we come back to this group and they reach out their hand so that Joshua can actually join them. What a wonderful world. Should have been Neku doing it instead of Shiki, but you know, whatever, I'll take it. And that's why I feel like The World Ends With You in Kingdom Hearts was the ultimate crossover. We got a very carefully constructed representation of The World Ends With You and its story. We got every single canon voice. We got references to deep cut lore. We got the first signs that Square has no clue what they're doing anymore when it comes to Shiki. We got the sickest Keyblade ever. We got 3 whole new remixes of World Ends With You songs. Shoot, that could have been a whole video right there. The Kingdom mixes are amazing. It may not have been perfect or on the level of The World Ends With You's writing, but in my opinion, The World Ends With You cast was treated above and beyond what any Final Fantasy character has received in Kingdom Hearts, and were arguably treated better than many Disney characters. I really hope that Kingdom Hearts includes our friends from Shibuya again in the future, and I have a feeling that time isn't that far off.